The boy was alive on the fourth day. By every rule I learned in 26 years of looking for lost people in cold country, he should have been gone by the second night. A child of 4 years has almost nothing to spend. He runs out of heat the way a candle runs out of wax, and the woods up here do not wait for you to be ready. I have carried small bodies out of those tree lines before. I know what the math is supposed to be. So, when the call came over that the search team had found him sitting up, dry, warm to the touch, I did not believe it. I drove out anyway, and what was around that boy, what was pressed into the ground in a ring all the way around the hollow he was tucked into, is the reason I am sitting here with a light on instead of asleep, like a sensible man my age. I have told the truth under oath more times than I can count. I have also learned which truths a man is allowed to say out loud, and which ones get him a quiet conversation about retirement and a referral to a doctor he does not need. The thing I am about to tell you lives in that second category. It never went in a report. It never went in a file. For a long time, it never went anywhere at all except around and around in my own head on the nights I could not sleep, which by now is most of them. I am not going to dress it up. I am not going to tell you it was a bear, because I have shot bears and skinned bears and tracked bears for most of my life, and what came around my place for the better part of 4 years was not a bear. I am not going to tell you what it was either, because I do not know, and I am too old to start pretending I know things I do not. What I can tell you is what it did, what it was like to share a piece of dark with it night after night, what it gave a frightened little boy in the worst stretch of weather we had that fall, and what happened the night it decided it was finished and never came back. None of the years I spent learning these woods got me ready for any of that. My name is Robert Bowman. I am 64 years old, and I have lived on the same 40 acres in Luce County, Michigan, in the eastern part of the Upper Peninsula, for most of my adult life. My land sits up against the state forest north of Newberry, where the cedar swamp starts and does not really stop until you hit the river. I spent 26 years as a sheriff's deputy in this county before I hung it up. Most of that time I was the one they called when somebody walked into those woods and did not walk back out. I knew the ground. I was good at it. That matters to the rest of this, so I am putting it on the table now. 3 people in this world know what I am about to tell you. My neighbor, Wendell Royce, who runs the last dairy on our road and who has known me 30 years, knows because he saw a piece of it himself, and we have never once discussed it past the once. A retired conservation officer named Lana Pruitt knows the bones of it, because she is the only person alive I trust to hear a thing like this and not flinch. And my son Marcus, who lives outside Phoenix and who I do not talk to near enough, knows because I wrote him a letter last winter that I have still not mailed. I am telling it now because in February my heart decided to remind me it has been beating for 64 years and would like some recognition for the effort. I spent 4 nights in a hospital in Marquette. A man does some accounting in a place like that, and the account I kept coming back to was not money or property. It was this, that there is a true thing I have witnessed, the truest thing I ever saw, and that if I went out of this world with it still locked up in me, then it would be as if it never happened at all. I am not here to convince you. I made my peace a long time ago with not being believed. I am here to set it down before I cannot. Before I go on, to the folks who have been with this channel a while and keep coming back to listen to an old man talk, thank you. I mean that plainly. If you are new here and you find you want to hear more of these once we get to the end, there is a button down there somewhere that tells the machine to keep showing you my voice. That is all I will say about it. Now, let me take you back to how it started. To understand what those visits meant, you have to understand what the place was like before they began, and I am not proud of all of it. My wife, Diane, passed in the spring of 2013. It was her lungs, and it was slow, and it took the better part of 2 years from the first scan to the last morning, and I will not spend your time on the details of it because they are hers and not mine to hand around. I will tell you the shape of what was left. The house got very quiet. I had retired 4 years before she got sick, with the plan being that we would finally do the things you tell yourself you will do. And instead, I watched her get smaller. And then, I was a man of 60, alone on 40 acres with 2 horses, a dog who was already old, and a list of repairs I no longer cared whether I ever finished. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make myself sound sadder than I was useful. I got up, I fed the animals, I split wood. I did the things a body does when it has done them for 40 years. But there is a difference between a man living and a man keeping the lights on out of habit, and somewhere in there I had slid from the first kind to the second without writing down the date. The land itself. Let me give it to you the way you would need it if you were going to stand on it. The house and barn sit on a rise at the south end, with the drive coming up off the county road. North of the buildings, the ground falls away into about 30 acres of mixed pasture and hayfield that I had mostly let go back to the county's idea of what it wanted to be. Past that is the tree line, and the tree line is the thing. It is not a tidy edge. It is hemlock and cedar and tag alder that thickens into proper swamp within 100 yards, and inside of a quarter mile, you are in country where a grown man can lose the sun. A creek I have always just called the North Creek runs out of that swamp, cuts across the bottom of the pasture, and disappears east toward the river. In a wet year it is loud. I want you to hold on to that creek. It comes back later, and it matters. There is a single white pine that stands out past the end of the hayfield, maybe 200 feet short of where the real timber starts. My grandfather left it when he cleared, and it is the biggest thing for a long way, and on a clear night with a moon, it throws a shadow you could measure. Diane used to say it looked like a sentry. I thought that was a romantic thing to say about a tree. I do not think that anymore. My closest neighbor in any real sense was Wendell, 1.25 miles south. There was a stretch that first year alone where I went 4 days that I can recall without speaking a single word to another human being, and I did not particularly notice until the 4th day, when I caught myself talking to Deacon, the older of the 2 horses, for a good 20 minutes while I picked his feet. He is a patient animal and a fair listener for a horse. That was the kind of stretch the place had become, long and quiet and mine, and not exactly the good kind of either. The last ordinary day, the last one before any of this, was the 11th of April, 2015. I remember because it was the day I finally pulled Diane's garden out, the raised beds she had built, because I was tired of looking at them gone to weed and feeling like a failure every time I walked past. I worked until dark. I went to bed sore and empty in the particular way that physical work leaves you when it has not actually fixed anything. And the next night, the 12th of April, was the first night something stood out by the white pine and watched my house. The horses told me before I saw anything. I had let them out into the near paddock that evening like always, and around 9:30 I heard Deacon do a thing he does maybe twice a year. A hard blowing snort, followed by him slamming up against the far rail, and then both of them went dead still, which is worse. A spooked horse that is moving is a horse working off its fear. A spooked horse that has gone rigid and pointed all in one direction is a horse that has decided the threat is too serious to move toward or away from. 30 years on this land, and I had seen them do that for a black bear exactly once. I went out onto the back porch with the yard light off, because you do not turn a light on into the dark when you want to see into the dark, and I let my eyes come around. It was that part of an April night up here where the cold still has teeth, the kind that finds the knee I wrecked in 1991 and reminds me of it. The frogs had not started yet that early in the year. There was just the creek, running loud from the melt, and the two horses breathing. It was standing beside the white pine. I want to describe this the way I saw it, and not the way it sounds when people tell these stories, because the way people tell these stories is wrong. There was no roar. Nothing charged. There was a shape next to my grandfather's tree that was the wrong shape, and it took my eyes a few seconds to admit what they were looking at, because the brain does not want to file something it has no folder for. It was standing upright on two legs. It was tall. I am going to give you a number, and I am going to hold to that number for the rest of this because I checked it against the tree later in daylight with a tape and a level head. It stood 8 feet. The lowest live branch on that pine is at 8 feet and 3 inches, and the top of its head came right up under that branch. The shoulders were the thing that did not make sense as a man. They were too wide, wider than the doorframe I was standing in. And I am not a small man, and I filled that frame. The fur was dark, a gray so deep it read as black until the shape turned, and a little starlight caught a paler patch down the center of its chest. The head was wrong for a man and wrong for a bear both. It was a dog's head. A long snout, ears set high and pointed, and turned toward my house. A jaw that, even at that distance you understood, was built for closing on things. And when it moved its head, the eyes came around and caught what light there was, and threw it back. Gold, the way a deer's eyes do in headlights. Except a deer's eyes are empty, and these were not. There was somebody home behind them. That is the part I have never been able to make smaller than it was. My first move was the wrong one for the situation and exactly the right one for the man I had spent my life being. I started, without deciding to clear and assess. Distance to subject, call it 37 yards. Cover between us, the paddock fence, useless. Nearest firearm, the .357 on the peg inside the kitchen door, 11 feet behind me to my left. I had laid all of that out in my head in about 2 seconds before some other part of me caught up and pointed out that I was running a tactical assessment on a thing that, by every rule of the world I had lived in for 60 years, did not exist. I almost laughed. I did not, because I did not want to make a sound, but the urge was there, and that surprised me more than the animal did. It looked at the house for a while. Not at me, I do not think, or not only at me. It seemed to be taking the whole place in. Then it turned, unhurried, and walked into the tree line. And the thing I have never forgotten about that first night is that it made no sound at all. 8 feet of muscle, and the cedar swamp swallowed it the way water closes over a dropped stone. I stood on that porch until my feet went numb. Then I went inside and sat at the kitchen table in the dark with the revolver in front of me until the sky started to gray. And I did not pick it up, and I could not have told you why. It came back the next night. The next night it came at 10 o'clock, and it stood by the pine, and I watched it from the dark kitchen window. The night after that, the same. By the end of that first week, I understood I was not dealing with an animal passing through. An animal passing through does not keep an appointment. Here is the part that I know makes me sound like a man who lost his judgment. So, let me explain it the way it actually went, because it was not one decision, it was 100 small ones. The first 3 or 4 nights I had the revolver in reach. By the second week I noticed I'd stopped bringing it to the window. Not out of bravery, out of arithmetic. If that thing had wanted me, or the horses, or anything else on my 40 acres, it had every night to take it, and it took nothing. It stood at the same distance, by the same tree, for somewhere between 20 minutes and an hour, and then it left. A predator that meant harm does not announce itself nightly from the same spot and then leave you in peace for years. Whatever else it was not hunting me. Once I believed that, the gun stayed on its peg. I never called it in. I want to be honest about why, since I was a man who spent his life telling other people to report what they saw. Partly, it was that I knew exactly what would happen, having been the deputy on the other end of calls like that. Partly, and this is the truer part, it was that I did not want anyone else to come. It was mine. It had chosen my pine, my dark, my quiet, the first thing in 2 years that had chosen me at all, so I started going out onto the porch instead of staying at the window. The first time, it shifted its weight when the screen door opened, and I froze with one hand still on the door. And we stood there, the two of us, while I learned what my own pulse felt like in my throat. It did not come closer, it did not leave either. After a few minutes, it settled back, and I understood that I had been given permission to exist on my own porch. So that became the arrangement. I would come out around 9:45 with a cup of coffee, sit in the chair Diane used to use, and it would come out of the trees and stand by the pine, and we would keep each other company across a couple 100 feet of dark. The detail that proved to me this was no animal came in the 3rd week. One night I had fallen asleep in the chair, which a man my age will do, and I woke with a crick in my neck near 11, certain I had missed it. It was still there, it had waited, and when it saw me wake and lift my head, it did a thing it had not done before. It raised one of its arms, slow, up to about shoulder height, held it, and lowered it. I am not going to tell you it waved at me like a neighbor. I am going to tell you exactly what it did and let you do what you want with it. It lifted a hand on the night I woke late. In a way, it never did on any night I was already sitting there waiting. It marked the difference. It knew I had not been there a moment before, and now I was. I remember that whole stretch in odd, useless pieces. I remember the coffee mug I used had a chip on the rim that I always turned away from my mouth out of habit. I remember a barred owl that worked the south woods all that spring, and how its call would land in the gaps between, and how the thing by the pine would sometimes turn its ears toward the owl and then back to me, like it was keeping track of who was where. None of that matters. All of it is true, and the true useless things are how I know I am remembering and not building. You learn a creature the way you learn a person you cannot speak with. By watching, over a long time, what changes when something else changes. It took me the better part of the first year, and I got things wrong before I got them right, and I will tell you the 3 I came to trust. The first was distance. It used distance the way the rest of us use tone of voice. On an ordinary night it held to the pine. On a night I was low, and there were a lot of those, it would be closer when I came out, halfway across the hayfield, as if the field itself were narrower. I do not know how it knew. I have turned that over for years. The best I have is that a man carries himself differently on a bad day, and a thing that watches closely enough learns to read a back and a pair of shoulders the way I once learned to read a man walking toward my patrol car at night. The closer it stood, the worse it had judged my evening to be. It was right more often than I would like to admit. The second was a sound it made, low, in the chest, that I came to think of as the settling sound. Not a growl. A growl is a warning, and I heard that exactly twice in 4 years, and both times it was aimed past me at something in the dark I never saw. This was different. A kind of long, low note that I only ever heard when things between us were easy. It made it on the good nights. After a while, I noticed that when it made that sound, my own breathing would slow to match it, and I will leave that there because I do not have a tidy explanation, and I promised you I would not invent one. The third was the ears and the turn of the head, which told me where its attention was, and which taught me the most, because more than once it was watching something I could not hear yet, and 10 or 15 seconds later a coyote would open up across the creek, or a car would come down the county road. It was always early. Always. Its world was bigger than mine by a wide margin, and on the nights I let myself, I felt like a man being allowed to sit at the edge of that bigger world and look out. Now, I am going to say a thing I have not said, because it is the kind of thing that makes a person sound like he has come loose. I looked forward to it. Through the whole long flat middle of the day, splitting wood or cleaning tack or sitting at the table with a bill I did not want to pay, the thought would arrive on its own. So many hours until 9:45. I built my days around the dark end of them. A man is supposed to dread the night when he lives alone. I had it backwards. The night was the part I was awake for. The rest was waiting. It was real, what passed between us. I have spent enough of my life around people lying to me to know the difference between a thing you talk yourself into and a thing that talks back. This talked back. Not in words. But there is more than one language for two living things agreeing they are both there. I am going to tell you something now, and it is the center of all of this, and I have never said it to a living person. In the late summer of 1994, a girl named Hannah Reuter, who was 7 years old, walked away from a family campsite at the Pretty Lakes flooding, north and west of where I sit now, on a Sunday afternoon. I was 39, and I was the deputy who took the first call and ran the early ground. By the next morning, we had 3 agencies and a dog team and better than 40 volunteers. I was given the east sectors because I knew them, and on the second day, with the light failing and the team strung out and tired, I had to make a call about where to put our last good hour of daylight, the drainage that ran down toward the river or the higher ground to the north. I chose the high ground. I had reasons. A child climbs toward open ground, the manuals say. A child seeks the easy walking. I said the words out loud to the men around me with confidence because that is the job. You do not hand frightened people your doubt. We found Hannah Reuter on the 4th morning, down in the drainage, in the water, about 600 yards below where I had turned us north. I have never known, and will never know, whether that last hour of light would have changed it. The medical people were kind and said probably not. Said she had likely gone in the first night. Kind is not the same as true, and they could not have known either. What I knew, what I have carried for going on 30 years, is that I stood in front of a fork in those woods with a child's life on it, and I went the wrong way, with my chest out, sounding sure. I never told Diane. I came home from that search, and she asked how it went, and I said we lost her, and she held me, and I let her think the grief I had was the ordinary kind, the kind any decent man would carry out of a thing like that. I let my own wife comfort the wrong wound for 20 years rather than show her the real one. I told the thing by the pine on a night in October of 2016. I do not entirely know why that night. I had been to a thing in town, a retirement send-off for a younger man, and somebody had brought up the Reuter search the way people bring up the bad old cases, not knowing, just talking, and I had smiled and nodded and driven home with my hands tight on the wheel. It came out of the trees at 9:45, and I sat down in Diane's chair and I started talking, and once I started I could not find the bottom of it. I told it the date. I told it the fork in the trail. I told it which way I sent us, and what I said and how sure I sounded. I told it her name. I had not said her name out loud in years. I want to describe what happened in my body, because that is the only honest way to give it to you. My voice came apart partway through, the way a voice does, and I stopped trying to hold it together. My hands would not stay still, and the thing came across the hayfield while I talked. Not fast, the way it always moved, deliberate, measured, closing the distance in the dark a few feet at a time until it was nearer than it had ever been, close enough that I could hear it breathing. close enough that I could smell it, which was a deep green smell, like the inside of the swamp after rain. And it made the low settling sound, the goodnight sound, and it kept making it, the whole time, low and steady, while a 61-year-old man fell apart in a lawn chair in the dark and told a wild animal the worst thing he had ever done. When I was finished, I just sat. The settling sound went on. After a while, I became aware that my coffee had gone stone cold, and I had not drunk any of it. And I thought, with the part of the mind that keeps running no matter what, that I ought to have set it on the microwave before I came out. Then I went inside and I slept. Whole. The first whole night in I do not know how long. The thing I have never said, the smallest and truest of it, is this. It did not look away. Every person I might have told, I believe, would have looked away, out of mercy or discomfort, or because that is what a face does when it does not know where to put itself. It held my eyes the entire time, gold and steady, and it did not look away from me or from what I was, and that is the night I understood that whatever it was, it had decided I was worth its attention. A thing that should have terrified me had become the only place I felt seen. I fixed the north fence the next morning. The bad section, the one I had been putting off for the better part of a year, it needed doing. That is all I am able to tell you about why it was that particular morning. In 4 years there were 3 nights, 3 that it did not come, and each one taught me something I would rather not have learned. The first was in the deep of the winter of 2017, a January with no story to it. I went out at 9:45, and the hayfield was empty, and I waited, and it stayed empty. No tracks the next morning, no sound, nothing. I told myself an animal misses a night, that even the most regular creatures allowed weather and hunger and its own affairs. But I sat out there until well past 1 in the morning in cold that I had no business sitting in, and I did not go to bed until I had to, and I learned how much I had come to need the dark to have something in it. The second time was my own doing, and I knew it the moment it happened. In the spring of 2017, my son Marcus came up from Phoenix for 4 days, the first visit in 3 years, and on the second evening I did a foolish thing. I wanted him to see. I did not tell him what. I just told him to sit out with me, and I left the porch light burning, hoping. Nothing came that night or the next. The whole time the light was on and the strange truck was in the drive. The night after Marcus left, I shut the light off, sat down alone, and it came across the field closer than usual, and stood a long while, and I had the clear sense, which I cannot prove and will not oversell, that I had broken a rule and was being looked at about it. It was not angry, it was something quieter than angry. It was a thing noticing that I had brought another set of eyes to a private place and weighing me on it. I never tried that again. The third night it did not come was the 8th of October, 2018, and at the time I thought it was the worst night of the run. 4 nights of an empty field, the longest stretch by far, and I sat out in the cold, each one of them sick with the certainty that it was over, and I had not even gotten to say so. I had no idea, none, where it was. I want you to hold that the way I once asked you to hold the creek. 4 empty nights in October, and an old man grieving in a lawn chair over an absence he had no name for. I know now where it was. I keep coming back to those 4 empty nights, the way you come back to a thing your mind would not let you understand at the time. It was not gone. It was a few miles north and east of my pasture, in the worst of the cedar swamp, lying down in the cold beside a 4-year-old boy, keeping him alive. It had left me. It had left me to do the one thing in this world I had failed to do, and it had not asked my leave, and I would not have understood if it had. The loudest creek I ever sat beside could not have told me. I only know it now, with the years run out, looking back at 4 nights of empty field, and finally understanding they were the fullest 4 nights of the whole story. By the 3rd year, the distance between us was not what it had been. I want to walk you through how that happened. Slow, because it happened slow. It started coming out to the near edge of the hayfield. Then, the next season, to the broken section of fence I had fixed the morning after the worst night. By the autumn of 2017, it would stand at the corner of the paddock, maybe 40 feet from the porch, and Deacon and the other horse, a mare named June, had long since stopped minding, which still astonishes me, 2 prey animals making their peace with 8 feet of predator at the end of their run. Animals know things we have buried. They had taken its measure faster than I did. The closest we ever came was a night in May of 2018. I had taken to leaving things out, not as bait. I never thought of it as bait, more the way you leave a porch light on for somebody. A few apples. Once, a whole venison shoulder from a deer Wendell had hit with his truck and given me. I would set it on the flat top of the corner fence post and go sit down. That night I had set out apples, and instead of waiting for me to retreat to the chair, it came to the post while I was still standing 8 feet away, and it took an apple off the post with those hands, and I saw the hands close up for the first and only time. They were not paws. I need you to understand that. They were long-fingered and the nails were heavy and dark and curved. Not claws exactly, but nothing like a fingernail, and the thumb worked against the fingers the way mine do, and it picked up a single apple as neat as a man would, and it looked at me from 8 feet away while it did it. I could have reached out and touched the fur on its arm. I did not. Some doors you do not open just because they are unlocked. My life on the daylight side of things got better, and I did not connect the two for a long while because I did not want to look that hard at it. But the facts are the facts. I started calling Marcus every Sunday, and the calls got longer. I let Lana Pruitt take me to breakfast once a month, and I actually talked. My doctor told me at my physical that fall that my blood pressure had come down enough that he wanted to know what I had changed, and I told him I was sleeping better, which was true and not the whole truth, and he wrote it down and was pleased. I do not say the thing in the woods did that. I say that a man who feels witnessed carries himself differently in the light, and the rest follows. You may make of it what you want. There is one more piece I owe you before the 4 days, because it is the only thing outside my own head that says I am not a liar or a sick man. In September of 2018, Wendell Royce came up my drive at 7 in the morning, which he never did, and he was gray in the face. He had found tracks in the soft ground along the North Creek where it crosses onto his land. He wanted me to come look before he convinced himself out of it. I went. They were in the mud, as clear as a printed page, and they were not a bear, and they were not a man, and they were spaced for something that walked upright on 2 feet with a stride longer than mine, and Wendell looked at me and asked me straight what I made of them. And there is the one time I almost broke and told another living soul the whole thing. I caught myself with my mouth open. 26 years of choosing my words in front of frightened people stood up in me and took over, and I heard myself say it was probably a bear walking funny, and Wendell looked at me for a long moment and we both knew I was lying and we both let it lie. He never asked again. But he saw. He is alive and you could find him, and he saw. Then came October. A boy named Wyatt Lindqvist, 4 years old, was up from downstate with his mother Renee and his grandparents at their family camp on the backside of the state forest, a little over 3 miles from my place as the crow goes, though no road runs it that direct. On the afternoon of Thursday, the 4th of October, 2018, while the grown-ups were closing up the camp for the season, that boy walked off into the cedar after a dog that had run a squirrel, and the cedar closed up behind him. I heard the call go out on the scanner I still keep, the way some men keep a thing from the job they cannot put down. Missing child, 4 years old, last seen at the camp. I had my boots on before I had decided anything. They did not need me. There were younger and faster men, and a sheriff, Dale Brunner, who had been a rookie when I retired and who ran a clean operation. But 30 years ago I had stood at a fork in those very woods, and I had been waiting my whole life since for a chance to stand at one again, and I was not going to be home for this one. I will not walk you through all 4 days of the search, because most of search and rescue is walking and waiting and walking, and you have your own life to get back to. I will tell you that the weather turned hard the second night, down near freezing, with a cold rain that is worse for a small body than dry cold, and that by the third morning the men's faces had the look I knew too well, the look of people who have stopped expecting to find what they are looking for and have started bracing for what they will find instead. I knew that look from the inside. I had worn it walking down toward a drainage 30 years before. On the 4th day, the 8th of October, a little before noon, a K-9 team working a sector the grid had nearly written off pushed into a stand of old-growth hemlock around a deadfall, and the dog would not go in, and the handler, a young woman named Peterson, called it in because the dog's refusal was its own kind of finding. They went in carefully, and in a dry hollow under the deadfall, out of the rain, packed around with a thick bed of dry cedar duff and moss that had plainly been gathered and piled, sitting up, talking alive, was Wyatt Lindqvist. 4 days. 3 nights of freezing rain. A child of 4 who, by every rule I ever learned, should have been a recovery and not a rescue. He was warm to the touch. That is the thing the medics could not get past and put in their notes anyway because it was true. After 4 days in those temperatures, a small child has no business being warm. The whole ground around that hollow, in a ring, was pressed and matted where something very large had lain, again and again around the boy, between the boy and the wind. There were tracks. Brunner's people photographed and cast them, and the casts went into an evidence locker, and then, I am told, quietly nowhere, because there was no folder for them either. They were not a bear, and they were not a man. And Wyatt Lindqvist, 4 years old, when his mother had him in her arms and the medics were trying to do their jobs around her grip, told everyone who would listen, in the flat certain way of a child reporting a fact, about the big dog who stood up like a man, who kept the bad dogs away in the night, the coyotes, who growled at them low so they did not come close, and who lay down around him when he was cold and made a sound in its chest that he liked, a low sound, and who showed him which red berries he could eat and slapped his hand away from the white ones. A low sound in its chest. I was standing close enough to hear the boy say it. 26 years of keeping my face still on the job is the only reason no one watched mine come apart. It had left me 4 nights running. It had gone north and east through 3 miles of the worst country in the county, to a child it had never met, and it had done the thing I could not do in 1994. It had stood at the fork and gone the right way. I have wondered ever since whether I gave it that, the night I told it about Hannah Reuter, whether a thing that watches as close as it did had taken the measure of the one wound I carried and gone, and answered it the only way it knew how. I cannot prove that. It is the most I have ever believed anything I cannot prove. It came back to me a few more times after that. I want to be exact. It came on the night of the boy's rescue, the 8th, late, after I had finally driven home, and it stood by the pine where it had stood that first April, and we looked at each other across the field, and I did not have any words, and I do not think it needed them. It came the night after, and the night after that. The last night it came was the 2nd of November, 2018. There was nothing about that evening to mark it. I want you to understand that, because it is the part that I have had the hardest time with. There was no farewell. There was no long last look that I can honestly say felt like a last look at the time. It was a cold, clear, early November night, the first real hard frost on the grass, the creek running thin and quiet the way it does once the fall rains quit. I went out at 9:45 with my coffee. It came out of the trees to the corner post. It made the low sound. We sat with it. After a while, it turned and went back into the cedar without a sound, the way it had 1,000 times. I went to bed. The 3rd of November, the field was empty. I told myself, January. I told myself, Marcus, the porch light, the night it punished an absence. I told myself 100 ordinary things and went to bed late and cold. The 4th, empty. The 5th, empty. By the end of that first week, I had stopped telling myself stories. I waited the way you wait for the first hour when you still believe, minute by minute, your eyes fixed on the black line of the trees, reading every shift of shadow into a shape and watching it resolve back into nothing. Then the way you wait across whole nights, the coffee going cold, the cold getting into the knee. Then the way you wait across weeks where you no longer expect it but you cannot make yourself not go out. It has been, now, a long time, and every night the weather lets me. I am out there at 9:45 in Diane's chair with a cup of coffee, looking at an empty field and the shadow of my grandfather's pine, keeping an appointment that only one of us still keeps. It stopped on the 2nd of November. I am telling you this in the summer that followed. So call it 8 months that I have sat out and it has not come. And I have learned what an empty chair across from you can do over 8 months when you have gotten used to it being full. I am going to use a word now that I have not let myself use until I had earned it. And I think 8 months of this earns it. Grief. It is grief. I know the shape of it from Diane, and I know it from Hannah Reuter, and I know it now from this, and the strange and almost shameful thing is that they all feel like cousins. The same hollow in the same place. A man is not supposed to grieve an animal that frightened the daylight out of him the first night he saw it. A man is not supposed to grieve a thing he cannot prove, and was never owed. I do anyway. I keep a notebook. I started it that first November without quite deciding to, and I make one mark in it every night that I go out, an empty night being still a night I kept. There are, as of last evening, 1,219 marks in it, counting from the 1st April it came, and a line drawn under the 2nd of November, and then the marks for the empty nights after, which I keep separate because they are a different kind of mark. I do not know why I count. My whole life ran on counts and measurements, and I suppose a man does not stop because the thing he is measuring has gone strange. The notebook does not bring it back. I keep it anyway. Lana came up in the spring and we sat on the porch, and she did not ask me to explain anything, which is why she is the one I trust. At one point, she looked out at the field and the pine and she said, "You still go out every night, don't you?" It was not a question. I said I did. She let it sit a while, and then she said, "You were lighter these last few years. Bob, lighter than I'd seen you since before Diane." I want you to know somebody noticed. I did not answer that. I could not have answered that. We watched the field get dark together and she drove home, and that is the closest I have come to telling another person while looking at their face. I cannot tell you the exact night it decided. That is the truth at the bottom of all my counting. I have a date for the last time it came, the 2nd of November. I have that nailed down. But the decision, if it was a decision, happened somewhere I could not see, on its side of the tree line, in a mind I only ever met across a couple 100 feet of dark. I do not know when it chose. I do not even know for certain that it chose. I only know the last night I had, and I know I did not know it was the last night, and there is a particular cruelty in that which anyone who has lost anyone will recognize. Tonight, like every night, the porch light will be off so I can see into the dark, and the chair will be out, and the notebook will be open on my knee, and I will be there at 9:45, watching the black edge of the cedar for a shape that does not come. I was trained to rule things out. So I have made myself sit with the explanations, all of them, and give each one the honest weight it is due, the way I would have worked any other case. The first is the plain one. It died. It was a wild thing, however strange, and wild things die, and an animal that I judged to be old, and I did judge it old by the last year, the way it moved a hair more carefully, the way a paler frost had come into the fur around its muzzle. An animal like that in country that hard, in winters that long, dies and is taken back into the swamp it came out of, and that is the most likely answer, and I know it, and I make myself look at it square. It is probably dead. The most probable thing is the saddest thing, and that is usually how it goes. The second is that something pushed it out. The state had done a timber sale to the north that fall. There were machines in country that had not heard a machine in a long time. A range can shift. A thing that needs deep quiet and a lot of room can be squeezed by a few miles of new noise into giving up old ground. And maybe it simply went where the woods were still big enough to hold it, and the camp where the boy was lost, and my pasture where the southern edge of a range it no longer holds. I do not love this one, but I cannot send it away. The third I do not dwell on, because dwelling on it does no good, and I have seen what dwelling does to a man. But I am too honest to leave it off the list. There are people in this country who shoot first at anything they cannot name, and there are tracks in an evidence locker that say something the size of it was real and close to where folks live. I do not let myself live in this explanation. I do not strike it out either. The fourth is the one I believe and cannot defend, and I'm going to say it plainly and let you judge me. It finished. It came for a reason I will never fully understand. It stayed for a reason. And on the 8th of October it did the thing that I think now the whole strange visitation might have been bent toward all along. And having done it, having stood at the fork and gone the right way, it had no more reason to come and sit with a broken old man in the dark. It completed something. Maybe mine, maybe its own. Maybe there is no line between those by the end. I am aware that the fourth explanation is the one that lets me feel chosen, and that a man should be most suspicious of the answer that flatters him most. I have weighed that too. I know the danger of reading a story into an animal because the story is the one I needed. I have held all four of these up against the light and turned them, and I will tell you where I land. I do not know. That is the honest answer. I do not know. But there are things I do know, and after all the not knowing I want to set them down where they cannot be taken back. I know it was real. I know it the way I know the ground I am standing on, because I am not the only one who touched the evidence of it. I know Wendell Royce saw tracks in the mud along the North Creek in September and is alive to say so. I know there are casts in a county evidence locker that no one has a name for. I know a 4-year-old boy named Wyatt Lindqvist, who could not have invented it and had no reason to, sat in his mother's arms and described the low sound in its chest, the same sound I heard 1,000 times across my own field, and that I never told that boy and never met that boy, and there is no way under heaven he and I should have heard the same sound unless the same thing made it. I know it could have hurt me on the first night and on 1,000 nights after, and it never once moved toward me with anything but care. I know that it kept a child alive through 3 nights of freezing rain, with its own body, in a hollow it had chosen and lined with its own gathering, and that the men who found that boy stood in a ring of pressed ground that told them plainly something large had lain down again and again to make a wall against the cold. I know that I told it the worst thing I have ever done, the thing I had not given to my own wife, and it did not look away, and I cannot know, but I think, and I'm going to say it, and then I am going to qualify it the way an honest man has to, that it understood what it was doing when it went to that boy. I think it knew. I think, having sat with my one great failure on a night in October, it went out 2 years later into the cold and answered it. I cannot prove a word of that. The behavior is all I have, but the behavior is a great deal, when you have watched it as long and as close as I did, and the behavior says a thing chose, again and again, to do the kind thing when nothing made it. That is where I land, not on what it was, on what it did. I am going to talk to you now, directly, the way I used to across the field, and I know the odds that this reaches you are none. I am going to do it anyway. You came every night and I never thanked you for it, because I did not have the words at the time and because a man of my generation does not say the soft thing while there is still time to say it, so I am saying it late. Thank you. For the company. For the dark not being empty. For sitting across from me on the nights when I could not have made it through alone, and you somehow knew which nights those were. Thank you for not looking away. I want you to know your leaving was noticed. Every single night since the 2nd of November has been noticed and marked. You did not slip off from a man who would not feel it. You left a hole the exact shape of yourself. My life is better than it was, and I owe you a piece of that. I call my boy on Sundays. I let people sit close to me again. I sleep most nights. The blood pressure is down, which my doctor still does not have a full explanation for, and I am not going to give him one. And if you are out there, old and slow, somewhere in country I will never find, I want you to hear the thing I would not have admitted to you while you were still coming. I needed you more than you ever needed me. I know that now. I am not ashamed of it the way I would have been. The chair is still out. The light stays off so I can see. Same place, same time. I am still here. So that is the whole of it. The thing I never put in any report, set down at last by a man who spent his life looking for the lost, and was found, late and from an unlikely direction, by something he never expected. What I was given was 4 years of not being alone, and a child carried out of the cold alive, and the worst thing I ever did taken from me and answered. What I lost was the giver, with no warning and no goodbye, on an ordinary night I did not know to hold on to. I will not pretend the second does not sit heavy, but I am not fool enough to call a thing like that a loss when I add it up. I came out ahead, by a long way. The creek is running thin tonight, the way it does in summer, and the pine is throwing its shadow, and the chair is out. If a shape ever does step out of that cedar again, old friend, you will not have to come all the way across the field. I will meet you halfway. I have got that much left in me. The light is off, I can see fine. If anything in this stayed with you, sit with it a while before you reach for your phone. That is the only thing I would ask. If you want to hear the next one, you know where to find me. Stay safe out there. The woods are older than we are.